We are going to close up shop with one final segment, and we started this last week. It's called What If? And if you've been following the NFL news, aside from the great coverage we're providing at Cincy Jungle, you would have known that Teddy Bridgewater, the Minnesota Vikings quarterback, had a gruesome, gruesome injury at practice, non-contact. I believe it was a torn ACL and dislocated kneecap. Luckily, no further damage, no arterial damage, any of that stuff. Had to be taken out off the field in an ambulance. It was pretty serious stuff. And if you know about Bridgewater and Fall, he's a great guy, great kid, a high character guy. So get well soon to Teddy Bridgewater, especially with Mike Zimmer, who all Bengals fans love as the head coach over there in Minnesota. But Connor, there's a couple of schools of thought here. If you want to be greedy, the Bengals should think about the option of trading AJ McCarron, who has had an outstanding preseason along with Andy Dalton, and looks to really have grown even more so than some of the good performances we saw at the end of last year. You could probably get a high draft pick, especially with some of these quarterback-needy teams, Denver Broncos, Minnesota Vikings, that sort of thing, as the season opens. You could probably get a pretty lucrative offer from these teams if you wanted to. If you want to be greedy and you feel like your team's pretty deep, that's one option. The other option is you look at last year and you see that Andy Dalton, who is normally very healthy, was injured last year, and the Bengals needed a capable starter to come in, not only lead them into the playoffs, but have them almost win a playoff game. Even though McCarron didn't play great, he did enough to win that game. So, what if, Connor, the Vikings call and want to give the Bengals a lucrative offer for AJ McCarron? Do you say yes or do you say no?
I mean, if the Vikings do it, then yeah. But, I mean, this is just a kind of Fantasyland scenario. I'm sure every team does its due diligence, but at the end of the day, I'm sure. And that being said, I'm assuming that I'm sure the Bengals have contacted the Vikings about some sort of potential trade offer for AJ McCarron, even though Marvin Lewis said, no, we're not going to do that. And ultimately, what it comes down to is, what is AJ McCarron's value? And to the Bengals, like we saw, I mean, people are going to say he won the playoff game. People are going to say he didn't win the playoff game. He didn't play that well. But that aside, he might be the most valuable backup quarterback in the entire NFL. And how valuable is a backup quarterback? Because as we saw, Brock Osweiler signed a huge deal to go play for Houston, to start for them after playing probably, I think, 5 or 6 games in his Broncos career as a starter.
And he got benched.
He got benched, and they won in the game that he got benched against San Diego, in the game that if San Diego had held on, the Bengals would have had that first round bye, which we were all aspiring to have. And that was crazy, because that game, man, I could go on about that game for such a long time. Because Peyton Manning didn't come in and do anything differently. All he did was just read opposing defenses better and check into a better run play than the run play they were already probably going to run. He didn't pass well at all. But ultimately what it comes down to is McCarron has value. The Bengals know that. His value is only going to go up if he's sitting on the bench. So why trade him now when there's going to be a team that comes around? I think he's under contract through 2018. I'm pretty sure. Maybe it's through 2017. But regardless, we have him on the team for the next, we have him for a while. So his value is only going to appreciate. The only way I trade him is for a high draft pick. I think if we sit back, let him play out his entire rookie contract, he's not ever going to re-sign in Cincinnati unless Andy Dalton gets hurt, plays terrible, or gets cut for whatever reason, which I don't think any of those 3 things are going to happen. So the only way that we're looking at keeping AJ McCarron is if Andy Dalton, for whatever reason, is not on the team any longer, which, like most people probably assume, is not going to happen. That being said, if he signs in free agency, the Bengals are going to get a comp pick, assuming they don't sign a big free agent, which is probably a safe assumption because they rarely sign big free agents. So then you're looking at, okay, well, what compensation or compensatory pick are we looking at? And I would say, I don't know, Osweiler, I think, netted his team a 3rd rounder or a 4th rounder. Let's just say devil's advocate here that McCarron's ceiling is a 4th round compensatory pick. So right now he's worth that already. So he's worth a 4th rounder. just like we're going to get a fourth rounder for him down the road, and we're also in the meantime going to have the best backup quarterback in the NFL until then. So what is like how much higher do you have to go than a fourth rounder for the trade to really pay off? And for me, it has to be like at the minimum a high second rounder, probably plus a late pick if it's a second rounder, or a first rounder of any value. And I don't think the Vikings are going to give up a first rounder for a guy to
No.
compete with Bridgewater. And that's really, I mean, I would love for Minnesota to send us a first rounder and a couple of late picks for McCarron. But what does that say about an organization who has just lamented the absence of Bridgewater as a guy who they believe is their future? And for what it's worth, I don't think they're really going to do anything. I mean, we saw they cut Brad Sorensen, who was their, I think, number 3 quarterback at the time, the day before Bridgewater got hurt. And then as soon as he got hurt, he took a plane back to Minnesota right from where he was headed, which would be an awesome. I mean, it would suck to the guy who's looking to hold on to a roster spot. It must feel so good to have that at first have that uncertainty about where am I going to go, and then the next day get a call and say, hey, you're back in Minnesota.
So Scott, the Bengals are a conservative franchise, and Connor obviously said this is kind of Fantasyland stuff, and in a way it is. This is kind of Madden franchise mode. You move and shake, but at the same time, I mean, obviously, a first round pick that's just not going to happen. A second round pick is possible, but probably far fetched. You're probably looking at a third round pick, maybe a pick and a player, that sort of thing. The Bengals are a conservative franchise. They saw what happened last year. They saw what happened with Teddy Bridgewater this year, and now the situation Minnesota is in without having a capable backup. So do you roll the dice and you say, Andy Dalton, who's basically been healthy up until 4 games last season, do you roll the dice and say, we're putting all our eggs in the Andy Dalton basket and kind of getting greedy and get what we need? Or do you play it conservative? What if the Vikings call and want a lucrative trade for AJ McCarron?
I'd say you look at what is the most important position on the football field today, and it's quarterback. Starting quarterback. Second most important position might be backup quarterback, as we saw last year. If they call, I think I say, yeah, that's nice. Unless you're giving us, an RG3 type of Jared Goff type of offer or something near there, it's not happening. And the reason is you look at someone like the Cowboys. 2 years ago, they were 12-4. They were one of the best teams in the NFL. Last year, Romo gets hurt, and they just go to crap. Bridgewater gets hurt, and he's not even a big Bridgewater threw for 3,300 yards. He's not even a big passing quarterback. And all of a sudden, as soon as he gets hurt, it's like, season's over. We were going to be playoff bound and go deep, and now we're, going to be in last place. And same with the Cowboys again this year with Rome. And yeah, it's just, I think if you can get a second quarterback, especially when we got, McCarron on the cheap as a late draft pick. And I think normally you get those picks for 4 years, and he's in year 3. So I'd say, if anything, if I was the Bengals, and granted I'm not, but if I was, if Mike Brown were to call me and say, hey, I'm making you GM, well, first that'd be cool. I'd have to move again. But besides that, I think one thing I'd look at was let's wait till his last year, because that way you can kind of plan for it. Like right now, if he goes out, we have Keith Wenning or a guy we're going to pick up off the street. And if Dalton goes down, we're in the same situation they are. So I would not give that up unless you're giving me one heck of an offer. But teams have been known to make silly offers. Kevin Kolb, I think, sat in Philadelphia forever, and they waited till a team was desperate, and I forget what they got for him, but they got a ton. And the Flynn,
Matt Flynn
from Green Bay to Seattle, he got it. They got it. So I'm thinking you can get, if you have a team desperate enough. So the Vikings only need a guy for a year. The Cowboys, if they aren't convinced Dak Prescott's the answer, they might be more willing to call you because Romo's getting old. That's a second major injury. If they don't think Prescott's going to be ready for a couple of years, and they're kind of an SEC country, so they might have more of a, interest in someone like McCarron, maybe they call and offer you a first and a second. But if you're not giving me at least, and like we said, it's probably not going to happen. So if they're not going to give me something that high, which is pretty much what a good, you look at a team like the Browns who always lose versus a team. If you give the Browns a decent quarterback, they probably go from a 3-4 win team to a 7 or 8 win team. So those wins are worth, that's got to be worth something. And just because of the first round pick doesn't mean it's always going to be good because the Browns, I mean, they obviously don't use them all very well. So I would want more in return. I'd say if you're going to give me a third or fourth, don't even bother calling me. If you're going to give me a first or a couple seconds or something, okay, yeah, let's discuss this because then you can use those picks to replace McCarron. But if you're going to give me a fourth round pick or a third round pick, I'd probably just hang up the phone, or I'd probably be really I wouldn't just hang it up. I might kindly hang it up, or say, oh, I can't hear you, fuzz, static, I can't hear you, and then hang up.
I'm going in a tunnel.
Yep.
Yeah.
Put a cup of water.
Yeah. So here's the thing, okay? I'm kind of in agreement with both of you guys. It would need to be a lucrative offer, and it would need to be something that really blew the Bengals' hair back in terms of what a team would offer. But you have to remember, in 2011, the Bengals went into the season with Andy Dalton, who looked terrible in the preseason and was a second-round pick, and not a bunch of people thought he would amount to anything. And Bruce Gradkowski, Carson Palmer, that was floating out there, and he said he was not going to play for the Bengals, even with that attitude. And granted, he was a number 1 overall pick, not a fifth-round pick like AJ McCarron, but you had a team.
National champion AJ McCarron.
Yeah, you had a team that got desperate right before the trade deadline that thought they were close enough in terms of their roster. You had a coach at the time, Hugh Jackson, who was very close to Marvin Lewis. You have to understand, Mike Zimmer has a similar relationship to Marvin Lewis in the Cincinnati Bengals, and now many people had the Vikings winning the NFC this year with Teddy Bridgewater healthy. If the Vikings feel that they're that close and they offer something that's crazy, like what the Raiders did to get Carson Palmer, I don't think you can hang up the phone. But as we saw, and as we're seeing around the league, if you don't have a starting quarterback that can come in and win games or at least game manage a team that is Bengals, you're in trouble, and you're not going to win the games that you should win. And so it is a razor's edge to walk, and I think the Bengals would be hard pressed if the Vikings come calling and offer a very lucrative deal for AJ McCarron this year. And with waiver wire cuts and all of that thing, the Bengals could potentially add in a backup quarterback. So it is a far-fetched scenario, but it's not maybe as far-fetched as some of the things we have been asked and heard of from Bengals fans over the years in our coverage of the team.
The Vikings, you have to look at, if they are that good, it's going to be a late pick too. So I think you'd have to ask for more, because a first-round pick, from a team that finishes in the playoffs isn't quite the same thing as getting a first-round pick from the Rams or the Browns or something.
Yep, definitely.